So on this panel here, we're kind of going to grapple with many of the issues that we've already heard today around what is the fourth industrial revolution. It doesn't have to be agreement over what it is either. I think that people can begin to push the boundaries of the definition, but also what some of the big issues are, and some of them we've already heard. So our first panelist, we have Hilary. Hilary is from Society Insight. Could you come up, Hilary?
Yes.
And we also have David Wood from the London Futurists. I think our other panelist, Tanya from Cambridge, I don't think she could make it. Is that?
So you get more time, yay!
Yeah, she's sick. So I was wondering. I can say it if you want. Yeah.
We will channel what Tanya might have said.
And so we're going to have the keynote speaker, just prior that you heard before, coming back and joining us. Take a seat. I guess that last session, your speech really went from like 0 to 60. For me anyway, as somebody who vaguely kind of is familiar with the term, has vaguely kind of covered some of the issues around automation and people losing their jobs in particular sectors. And I think that's when certainly the conversations around the fourth industrial revolution really hits home to the public. Because a lot of these conversations happen in kind of smaller rooms. They might happen in particular sectors. They might happen for people who are investors, but generally the public conversation around these issues generally is quite small. Now, I think bringing it back here, for people who are still quite new to it, what would you call the fourth industrial revolution if you were communicating it to somebody who had never, ever been familiar with the term?
He didn't tell me he was going to ask me that very complicated question. I thought I was going to spout my stuff.
We'll get there.
I think that actually it's about people making stuff, doing stuff. They're just doing slightly different things. So all this big thing about the system, actually I'm not any different from having a mobile phone. I'm still me, I'm a person, I'm not any different. So for me, I think the fourth industrial revolution is a series of new technologies in all sorts of different areas, perhaps driven by digital, but actually, I don't think it's hugely different. It doesn't make people different. It actually, I want to think that the fourth industrial revolution is possible to empower people more, to give us more dignity. But that will only happen if we personally start to take control of all of our approach to it. So the bit that I was going to give you was about, the trustworthiness of the fourth industrial revolution. How do we, in our everyday work, and whether we're making an app, whether we're designing a system for the NHS, whether we're doing a self-driving car or a robot for social care, what makes what we do trustworthy? How can people trust that what we do is for social good without causing more problems than we solve? So I would bring it right back to what we all do every day, which is different tomorrow than it was yesterday.
I mean, I guess that's a good point. I guess that details on what you were speaking about, in the sense that actually the conversation around what is good for loads of people is not really the main driver of technology right now. So I mean, that seems to be a really difficult conversation to have. I mean, how would you respond to that?
I think the bit that I always struggle with when answering what is the fourth industrial revolution, as you can see, is the fact that it tries to accomplish so much. But I think Hilary's point of starting with the individual is actually key to it. The fourth industrial revolution, I think, enables the potential for individuals to interact in ways they never have before, at a scale and a rate they never have before. The idea that you have 500 or 5 million followers on Twitter, there was nothing that would allow you to reach that many people even 30 years ago. And it's those individual changes that are subtle in some ways, but are profound in terms of what they mean for our political and our social institutions. But there's no easy way to capture that. I think the focus on the individual and the asking the question, how do we create that empowerment around these technologies? What we're mostly seeing in the way these technologies are unfolding right now are the unintended consequences, or the unexpected consequences, which I agree, Hilary, it's this idea of how do we bring it back down to the individual, but understanding that you suddenly plug the individual in to networks that are changing so much faster and sending information at you, where even half of what you see on Twitter is probably generated by machine learning, by a bot, by something that's that a human being has asked a bot to try and pulse and influence. And so it's that
But I
subtle
know loads of
interface.
people who are really trying hard to think through the impact and consequence, and it's
Absolutely.
already here. So this is not happening like, oh, holy shit, it's all going on, nobody's doing anything. People are trying really
Absolutely.
hard to really think how we shape it. How you go from Airbnb, 3 guys with a mattress trying to rent out a mattress, to being a threat to global tourism in 5 years. Holy shit.
It's incredible.
But people, so they are allowed to be a little bit taken on the back foot with the change and how to act and react responsibly. But I think that society is involved in this, and I think people are pushing for different behaviours because of the enablement of different conversations, different places, and people are acting more responsibly and thinking about it very, 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 very hard. So I don't think it's this dystopian, it's all happening to us, oh my God. I think people are really trying to make it work for society without causing it.
Yeah, can I bring things? Yeah.
So we're starting to think about it, but we have to speed up
Yeah.
because we're only seeing the very beginnings so far of the 4th Industrial Revolution. So here's my simple answers to what's different about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Previously, technology has given us the ability to change nature. The 4th Industrial Revolution will give us, if we want, the ability to change human nature. It will give us the ability, within maybe as little as 10 or 20 years, to change fundamental constraints and limitations which have been problems for human life throughout history. But the fact that so many people get cancer, the fact that so many people get heart disease, the fact that so many people get dementia, more generally the fact that people age. All of these things could be undone and abolished, if we wish, and if we steer the 4th Industrial Revolution, genetics, biotech in the right way. More than that, about our character, our mind. Throughout history, we've all been troubled by us sometimes being stupid, sometimes being narrow-minded, sometimes being prejudiced, sometimes by getting too emotional, sometimes by being too tribalistic, too xenophobic. And even today, when there's so much information around, we're still using often our self-centered human nature just to cherry-pick the ideas that back up our arguments and push out the others. And so we are actually ending up with more divisiveness rather than more cohesion. So the other thing that we can do with the 4th Industrial Revolution is we can, if we want, get more quickly into a state of enlightenment, a state of wisdom, a state of higher humanity. So that's possible. My goodness, it's going to be profound. In terms of describing it, depending on how much time I've got, I say 4th Industrial Revolution is a convergence of 4 separate things, NBIC, nanotech, biotech, infotech, cognitech, and in each of these 4 separate things there are completely different possibilities not far into the future compared to what we've got now. With nanotech, we've got, and that's used very broadly. I know Hilary's an expert in nanotechnology, but used very broadly, it includes things like quantum computing. Quantum computing potentially is going to be here, maybe as early as 5 years, certainly within 10 years, doing at least some computational things much, much faster than we've ever imagined before, solving problems which were completely inaccessible before. In terms of the infotech, what we can do with deep learning is astonishing. The improvements we might talk about with Google's DeepMind AlphaGo program, even in just a short space of time. It's already remarkable that they managed to beat the best Go player in the world in such a short space of time, when previously people had said it's going to take 20 years to reach this level of competence. Google applied a team to it with some very clever things called deep reinforcement learning, and they beat the best Go player 4-1 in a match not long ago. But that game was taught by a huge amount of human tuition. It studied all the games of Go that had ever been played. More recently, Google did an iteration of that, in which only started off with a completely blank slate. It just knew the rules of Go. It had a simplified algorithm. Instead of having 2 separate deep learning networks that were interacting, it had just one. And within 3 days, it taught itself to a level that could beat that former Go player, that former Go algorithm that already beat the world champion 4-1. It beat it 100-0 in a tournament. And moreover, whereas the former one was running on, I think it's 44 TPU cores, the new one was running on just 4 TPU cores. The pace of change is remarkable. It's been a long time, and most people are not aware of what's going on here. And in terms of cognitech, as I said, it gives us the ability to reprogram our minds as never before. This is scary stuff. If we get it wrong, my goodness, we're going to regret it. but we should not abstain from it. We should not throw up our hands and say, let's go back to the 1950s when everything was wonderful. We should say there are too many terrible things about human nature and human society. Let's use our collective wisdom. Let's use what technology does to allow humanity to go to a higher level than ever before, which sometimes I call humanity plus or transhumanism. To flesh out Alvin's forwardism, he said here's a basic philosophy. I think it's got a better name. It's called transhumanism or techno-progressive transhumanism. It says we can and should use technology to free humanity from some of the debilitating limitations which we've got and allow us to reach to a much higher state of flourishing. I'm not talking about more economic prosperity. That would be good too. It's spending more time doing what is the truly human aspects of creativity, building relationships, and so forth.
See, I mean, one of the big things that you're speaking about has been about pace, about acceleration, about pace, and about how few innovators are really just racing ahead of everybody else. Now, in a large part of my job, which is largely communicating what's happening in various fields to the public, who largely know various levels of knowledge, I mean, what would be some of the concerns to your ordinary person, especially when the average person, their main concerns are around how I earn and how I have influence over my life? So in the case of the fourth industrial revolution, what do you consider to be the concerns for these particular areas?
My sister, this is what I do for a living, which is public engagement in society in technology. And my sister said, Hilary, I don't know why you bother doing your job. If there's something going on, I'll hear about it on the news. You're wasting your time. Because she trusts people that are supposed to sort it. And a nanotechnologist once said to me, I'm on the quantum dialogue oversight group now, and the synthetic biology governance group now, so I'm just not on one trick pony no more. So Hilary, the public has a duty to understand nanotechnology. The public has a duty to understand that. We who are creating these technologies have a duty and a responsibility to make them in a way that is trustworthy, so that the public, we don't know how our mobile phone works, it's not our responsibility.
But many of the innovators, you say they have a responsibility, but do they even feel that responsibility?
They absolutely feel that. So on all these different areas, a lot of them do, a lot of them are. So responsible innovation is the thing I sort of deal with, which is it's not trying to have scientists, companies, even policy people understand that it's not just about, shall we do it just because we can, because I've got this great new quantum thing, I can do it. How do we steer it for social good? How do we look after broader impacts? And how do we collectively have this dialogue? Now, actually, self-driving cars is great because a lot of people were all involved in this discussion.
Okay, so you said, how do we?
You, people like you. So you're out there in the media, your people are here. There's some interesting television programs going on. There's some interesting methodologies where, like, social citizens' juries, public's involved in all sorts of different ways, in all sorts of different aspects of the things that matter to them. So I don't think my sister has to go to some church hall to think about nanotechnology. But something that she is interested in might be a self-driving car, and she might go to something like, she might fill in an online thing. She might have an opinion on some aspect of that, but I don't think you need to know what quantum tech is or what the gubbins of a self-driving car to have a discussion about, do I want it, and I don't want to be part of something that crashes into something.
Okay.
If I can just jump in here, how many of you know where your electricity is produced? Which station produces it, or what even the distribution is? How many of you know where your nearest water treatment plant is and where your sewage goes? How many of you want to know?
He doesn't.
And so some will, but the reason I'm asking that is most of us take for granted most of the services and the technologies that came out of the last century. They're in the background, they make our lives better, and we love them. And many of the technologies that we're talking about here, some of them are already in the background and we're taking them for granted, but my big concern is about the ones that are beginning to accelerate and where access isn't ubiquitous, where access, because the concentration of the capability to reach out broadly throughout the system and capture rents off of the top of that, enable a small number of corporations or individuals who have access to the quantum computing technologies, who have access to the data that's being generated from these distributed systems, gives them unique power within society. So my concerns aren't about whether the individual on the street knows what nanotechnology is, but rather how the evolution of these technologies concentrates political power or concentrates financial power or resources in ways that we don't have. And it goes to the question that the gentleman was asking to begin with. What about the billion or 2 billion people for whom these technologies are not even the technology that we need to be talking about in terms of access to basic services? How does the acceleration and concentration of wealth due to these ones privilege us, but leave out a whole bunch of people from the conversation? How we harness, shift the direction of the innovation ecosystems to address things like UN Sustainable Development Goals, poverty alleviation, education access, that's something that I don't see as being as easy as a conversation just in terms of stakeholder engagement. It is a fundamental question about the political structures, the economic structures, and there are opportunities to leverage these technologies, Kenya banking and others, if we're focused on the right problem to solve. Rather than what's the technology and where's the technology going, what's the problem we want to harness the technologies to address? And that's a fundamentally different conversation that sometimes in the fourth industrial revolution gets lost because it's all about the revolution of the technologies, not the problems that we're not addressing along the way. And how to plug those two conversations together, I don't have good answers to it, but I think that's exactly why things like the fourth group talking about new politics and new discussions that transcend borders in the same way that the technologies transcend borders, I think is a critical part. We've got the technology going at light speed, we don't have the political shifts.
So I give my answer as to why there are 2 million people who are excluded from much of this.
Billion.
2 billion, yes. Whereas some countries, there's been a lot of progress. So it's remarkable what's happened in China in terms of people being raised out of poverty into a much better state. It's a technological problem, but it's the problem of the technology of society. Society has various technologies, it's called institutions. It's things like how the financial institutions work, how the political institutions work, whether there's open discussion of the issues, or whether it's easy for the people who happen to come into power to take more of that power away. The best account I've read of this is called Why Nations Fail. It's a masterpiece of analysis of countries throughout history by Darren Acemoglu, and I can't remember who the other writer is. It's a fantastic book. Talking about the nature of the institutions that could extract wealth, or whether it's inclusive institutions. But the point here, feedback to what Jason's saying, I'd love more people to be discussing exactly that topic. The Acemoglu's thesis has got some criticisms and issues. That's what people should be spending more of their time talking about, instead of lots of things that are filling up our minds with trivia,
But I see that happening all the time. I see it happening a lot.
Yeah.
So you maybe not in academia, but so we're going to the World Economic Forum Global Futures Council next week. I don't think you're going there. He's a global future scholar of the future or something like that. And all around, say my group, human rights, there's all sorts of groups all across the world, looking at global governance of artificial intelligence, looking at how to stimulate, So there is a lot of thinking. It keeps very early days, but there is a lot of people thinking these sorts, which is, I think, very encouraging.
Good to start.
I agree it's a start, but most of those conversations, in my experience as a physicist, as a technologist, are around the technologies. And I think the big shift where the fourth industrial revolution conversation is often, the fourth industrial revolution is about technology, but it's the disconnect between the technology and things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I keep going back to that as a global example, but nationally we need those conversations. So it's a shift in the...
So ultimately, it's a conversation around how can the many kind of collectivize the advances in technology, which seem to be being raised ahead by a minority who are largely profiteering from it. And is that the conversation we're having here, collectivizing advancement?
Well, it goes back to one of the questions that Sarah asked. What would the people running the unicorns think? Well, what the people running the unicorns would think, hang on a second here, this is about the free market economy and the structures that we have. What's their incentive? What's the incentive of the people doing the deep work on these issues to engage in the conversation about the problems and the challenges that could be solved, where there may not be, where there isn't the immediate financial gain? So it's a re-incentivization of where we're going, and that's a fundamental issue.
It's not just about their incentives, it's also about the fact that you have huge groups of people who are going to be impacted by what these individuals do, and about those millions or billions taking power to shape what it is that they're doing. That's also a part of the conversation, because if there's going to be developments in automation, then these category of people are going to be losing their jobs, and therefore, how do we then organise to think about how those resources are shaped?
Okay.
What's in it for us? And that seems to be a real kind of tension here.
These discussions need to be better informed about why technology is actually accelerating many of the issues there. There is inequality, and people say the reason there's inequality and job loss is because of things like globalization, and that's part of it true. It's also the declining power of the unions, that's partly true. The biggest driver for is going to be the way technology works, the way that technology allows a small number of people like these tiny unicorns to have such a success. One of the first unicorns, Instagram, that a company that did very clever things. They were very bright the way they managed to allow photo filtering to dovetail on top of the iPhone. Within 18 months from their founding late in 2010 to early 2012, they had acquired a social network of 100 million users, even though there were only 13 employees, and they were bought by Facebook for $1 billion. And that implies that on average, if you compare them to another large photography company, Kodak, whose valuation was much higher, but they had something like 86,000 employees, it implies that the average productivity, the average value of each of these Instagram employees is 220 times as much as in it. And you see similar things. If you look at the top 3 companies in Detroit, in Motor City, in about 1990, they had the same revenue as the top 3 companies in Silicon Valley in about 2014. So if you look at these top 3, the good comparison. The Motor City the motor companies have 10 times as many employees, and the implied valuation, actually the public valuation of these 3 companies, with 3 motor companies in Detroit, it came to about 36 billion, whereas the 3 valuations of the Silicon Valley companies came out 30 times higher at 1 trillion. So that's an implied gain of 1 billion times. These forces are there, they're very strong. It's not just they're building abundance, it's building an inequality. And we're going to have to be more aggressive in addressing these issues. We're going to need better institutions to fight against the issues of individual companies naturally sucking all the wealth towards them. And that needs to be informing the discussions. I was at the meetings of the all-party parliamentary group on AI, which is a good initiative. It's now met 6 or 7 times. They are talking about the issues, but my goodness, they are still stuck in the problems of the past. They're only vaguely considering that maybe a certain number of jobs will be lost by automation. I think that 100% of jobs are at risk within the next 15 years or so. People try to think.
And I guess that's the place where most people kind of understand this conversation around automation. How does it impact them, their ability to earn, and their ability
But it's
to
only the beginning of it.
their lives.
What technology is doing to politics is awful. You know, the fact that we are having so many divisive issues instead of having discussion. But that affects everybody's lives in a big way too.
Definitely. It's at this point now that I want to kind of open up the floor for kind of contributions or clarification, particularly around the kind of issue question of what you perceive to be the pressing issue of the fourth industrial revolution.
Just one question.
Just one question.
Just one question. And
For one person?
Yes, from one person you've got to pick.
Well, in that case, this person here needs to have a banging question. It just needs to be fire. So if your question is not fire, you need to put that hand down. Okay. I've got to see one hand over here. Any more hands? Don't let me intimidate you. Put your hand over your hand. That's fine. So I've got another hand over here. Higher, please. I need to see all of them. Be confident with it. I think you had your hand was kind of up. Yeah. Was it up or is it down? Okay. So I saw another hand over here. Can I see all the hands?
How's he going to pick you? What's the discriminatory process?
You know what? I'm going to democratize this process. I'm going to let everybody here turn around and see whose hand up and pick that person. So put your hand up high.
You could have asked them all by this.
Okay, so sorry.
That's not better democracy. That's average. The best insight comes from a discussion, not from just a vote without any information.
Well, debatable. So we have one hand at the front, a hand here from this lady, a hand here from the gentleman, and a hand here at the back. Who does the room want to hear from?
Everybody.
Everybody. We can
A quick question of 2 seconds.
Otherwise, I'll just pick myself and I'll just take the power back.
Hear all the questions and then if
Yeah,
there's-
hear all the questions.
Great, I like that.
Yeah. All the
What's your question?
Well, my question is I completely agree with the comment about institutions needing to change, but I think we need to come back to Elvin's point right at the beginning, and my question to the panel is, what does citizenship mean? Underlying all of this, what does it mean to be an engaged citizen locally, nationally, and globally?
Okay, I like that question.
Okay, so you're talking about changing human nature, and you're talking about that nothing's going to put a stop to what's happening. But then aren't we undervaluing current human nature and the fact that human beings don't want to engage with technology? Are we forgetting to think about the ideas of backlash, and are we forgetting to think about people dropping out of the revolution?
Cool.
So technology is agnostic, right? So you can use a gun to shoot an animal that is overpopulated, or you can use it to shoot humans. My question is, things like Facebook and stuff like that, they're essentially an expression of the system that they built within. Like Facebook is pure neoliberalism. It commoditizes the people that it uses and then uses that to basically extract rents from the data. Do you think there is a chance that we can use this technology differently? Like an actual chance? Do you seriously believe that we can build the collective Facebook for good or something like that? Do you actually think that's possible in this system?
My question sort of touched on, I guess, the first question, which was defining what the fourth industrial revolution is. And for me, I wanted to sort of go one step deeper into that, which was really understanding what impact it has on our political structures. Because I don't feel like there's been much of a conversation about, because currently right now we're in capitalism, effectively, or and it's debatable, but we effectively old political structures that we were used to encompass using money. And I was just wondering, do you think maybe this fourth generation, so industrial revolution, could potentially, for example, fundamentally shift the structure? So could we have a society that doesn't even need money or premise of scarcity that came about through, John Smith and the Wealth of Nations and various other economic thinkers? Do you think that's going to free us as human beings, or do you think it's just a continuation, as you guys have alluded to, for minority effectively holding power and basically keeping the structure as it is? As you just mentioned, 2 billion people are living in absolutely abject poverty, yet we can send people to space, and we can obviously use instantaneous technology such as WhatsApp to communicate with people across the world. I find that a bit of a conundrum, a bit of a paradox, that we have such a major
Short question.
Okay. You know what? In that case, there's some really good questions here about citizenship, about how we value humans, also about how can we actually objectify technology. I think I'll let the panel respond to what piqued your interest and what you feel you can add to some of these contributions. We start with you, Hilary.
I think we should stop talking about the technology, because we're all so distant. All these conversations are so theoretical and so distant. Let's think about it as the first empowerment revolution. Let's think about what what we are going to do ourselves. You think, if you don't like it, you think, hey, shit, no, I don't like that. What I see happening is people changing things all over the place. People not standing for the things that they don't like all over the place. Now, whether that's Brexit that you don't like, so it's called populism when you don't like it, it's called democracy when you do like it. People are changing things everywhere. So let's have a think, citizenship, what is our responsibility? What do we want to do? What can we do? And we can do an awful lot more as individuals than you personally think you can. Especially you young people, when you get old like me, you think, God, if I had known how powerful I was and how influential I could have been, I could have done really great stuff. So go out there and make it so people.
I've touched that with the Facebook question and the nature of capitalism. Mark Zuckerberg isn't all bad. What he's committed to doing with his wife is giving away the vast majority of his fortune to cure all diseases. So he has a heart there. It's just that he operates inside an environment which pressurizes Facebook to pursue its economic goals very highly. So we need to counter that. We need to counterbalance that. We need to put extra pressures on society, and part of that is citizens speaking up, and part of it is politicians being able to put constraints on it. Not foolish constraints. We're going to have to engage hard. There are some quite hard questions there. What should citizens do? We need to become informed. That's the first thing. We do need to learn a bit about this. We can't just delegate our understanding to what we happen to read in whatever our favourite newspaper is. And we also need to figure out what's very important. What is the value? Citizens want to rise above just being, well, I like this a bit and I like this a bit. We've got to figure out what is of fundamental importance. And what is of fundamental importance, in my view, is that we can actually take humanity as a whole to a much higher level than before. It's not getting rid of our old human nature entirely, it's about allowing the best of our old human nature to flourish and not be constrained by the worst of our old human nature. So we need to see that. Finally, on Facebook, I noticed that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have signed up for a very important organization called Partnership on AI to benefit society and humans. I can't remember exactly the name, but it's something like Partnership on AI. They are asking and working hard to figure out what are the rules which constrain how they use algorithms. And they have been at a couple of events called the Beneficial AI held, and that I think is the most important conference that's ever been held in the history of humanity. More important than what's gone on at the Economic Forum. There were some economists there, Jeff was there.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Is there a chance? Yes, I believe there's a chance, but is it going to happen through directly tackling and trying to change the political system all in one go? No, and I think that comes to the question of the we. We often are using this phrase, we. Who is the we when you look around at the people who are involved in the technology revolution, who are involved in driving it, who are involved in the political revolutions? They're different people, and they're different individuals, and they're driven by different incentives that are partly the system, but partly individual. If we really want to enact change in the direction of travel, and I think it does come back to John's question about citizenship, but not just citizenship of the local, the national, the international, of politics, but also the citizenship of the technologies that we all buy into and we participate in. That question of, we all use Twitter, we all use Facebook, and there are conversations in both of those going on about what are the dangers of the cliques that we end up forming that just reinforce our political views and isolate out questions that we're not used to talking about. And there's arguments that can contribute to the political divides that don't enable us to have some of the deeper conversations about policy reform. So, as members of Facebook, as members of Twitter, as citizens of that community, we also have a voice in the direction of travel of the technologies and whether they get used. I think it keeps coming back to me though, how do we capture those voices that aren't included? How do we capture the voices who are not actually included in the technologies themselves? And then that comes to a different question of citizenship, of what is our citizenship or our link to those individuals who are outside of this room. We're helping drive the tech revolution through the things we buy, through the stuff that we do, but being able to engage in the conversation of what we want to see those technologies do in the long run and figure out through Partnership on AI, but through a whole range of other social movements that can be facilitated by this, things like the Fourth Group, you start to create new conversations that bridge those barriers.